All right, welcome to Women Unstoppable Collective. We apologize for the lateness of today. We are going to get started today, and my name is Jessica Hammock. I'm one of the coaches for Women Unstoppable, and we have with us today Nancy Bollman, and I'm going to let Nancy tell you a little bit about herself and her journey. I've really enjoyed working with her in a program that she has called the Lighthouse for New Hope. So Nancy, will you tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of how you got to this part of life in your journey for the Lighthouse?
Well, I've been involved in the area of grief and loss, especially with children, for over 30 years. I got kind of interested in this arena a long time ago when my husband was teaching at a mortuary college, and we would go to these conferences, and it was in the middle 70s, and it was just beginning. The psychology of grief and loss was just beginning, and I kind of gravitated to those meetings. I wasn't interested in the other section.
Mm-hmm.
I was young, in my 20s, and from there I just kind of saw the path that God was leading me on, and it was a calling on my life. And I went in to Stephen's ministry, which was a ministry within the church. It's a ministry that helps pastors with people that are kind of at home and need extra attention. And all the people that I was working, all the people, the adults that I were working with, had a significant loss as a child, and it had impacted them all their lives.
Yeah.
And they had gotten stuck, and it really was interesting it was hard to get unstuck when you're an adult. And I just had, then I got involved with kids, and then I came to the conclusion that God was calling me to actually start my own program. And so that's kind of where I am with it. God has sent some wonderful people to partner with me. And I've sat and watched this vision come to pass. We now have a grief and loss center in Mesquite, and we serve our community, and now we're serving people online.
Awesome. That's, a great storyline to see all of the places that you've been able to connect with people along the way, and just kind of, pick up a lot of new stories and information, I imagine. I've enjoyed getting to know you and hearing all of the things that you've learned and picked up just from the perspective that you have. So my official first question would be kind of like this, insight into you and your life and your kind of your mission and vision. And that would be, what is it that makes you jump out of bed every day?
I knew you were going to ask that. And I'm going to tell you, at 72, I don't jump out of bed anymore. But every day, I know that there's something exciting that's going to happen. And, I just look for it expectantly. And because it sounds strange. I know this is what, I looked on your page and it says Fun Friday. I can't imagine talking about grief on Friday. But it's amazing how, when you are doing what your calling is in life, that you feel this joy, and you feel this excitement, and you feel this passion for what you're doing. And it's interesting, most of my volunteers, almost all of my volunteers, they'll say, people can't figure out why we do this. And they don't understand. I get excited every time I get to be a part of something's going on with the Lighthouse and with kids. And I think it's because we know that it actually helps. You know, you can make a difference in somebody's life or kid's life. And that you actually can be those ears for listening, and those arms for hugging, and those just being present with somebody. And then that makes a difference. So that brings you a lot of joy and gets you out of bed every day.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, we want everybody to be safe, that's for sure. But I definitely agree with the fact that watching someone process through, it's kind of like one of those lights, that is on a dimmer switch. When you interact with somebody, they're all at different levels. But ultimately the dimmer switch kind of grows, and the light in their face and who they are just climbs to they are beginning to shine with, life, as they process. So what things maybe in your life prompted you to kind of seek out grief support? Or I know you mentioned the mortuary college and kind of interacting with things that way, but thinking about your own journey in grief, what kind of led you to recognize that support was important?
Um, you know, um, my mother had significant losses as a child, and she lost her mother at 19, and her way of dealing with things, and she experienced all these things. The way she always dealt with things was basically denial. You pick up by the bootstrap and you go on. So she didn't want, I came from a family of 8, there were 6 kids. And so one of the ways she just never allowed us to go to funerals or to do anything. We just sort of pretended like things didn't happen. So when I was in college, who was next door to us, Molly, was like my grandmother. My grandmother lived in California. And she made a decision to hang herself in her closet on the 7th anniversary of her husband's death.
Wow.
And I was in college. And I think about that. I could never figure out. She was such a happy person, couldn't figure that out. And my mother's decision was that she was not going to tell me. So I didn't know. So I didn't attend the funeral. I was off at college, and I didn't know until I came back home the next weekend, a couple weekends later, and was informed of that particular death. And it was devastating because I didn't get to experience with the family grief.
Yeah.
And so about 6 months later, a gentleman who's like a brother, who grew up next door and was like a brother, he'd gone off to Vietnam, and he died in Vietnam. And I guess figured out that it wasn't protecting your children from grief, didn't keep them from grieving. And so she did.
That's so good.
Yeah. So she did, contact me, and I came home, and that was the very first funeral I ever went to, which was extremely emotional. Had no idea what a funeral was about. I just went. I couldn't control any of my emotions. And so I just realized, and then I was sent back off to college. And no tools, nothing, not knowing how to do it. And everybody thought everybody was all right. And I wasn't. I wasn't all right, and to this day, it impacts me. In fact, I can feel it inside of me right now, that loss. So that was probably, those two profound losses right together probably was something that developed curiosity in me as I got older. And like I said, my husband was teaching at a mortuary college. People started coming and asking me things when I was in my 20s about grief, and I didn't know anything. So I thought, if they're going to come ask me, I better learn something. So I really became fascinated with it. So that's kind of little.
You said. You said two things that definitely I want us to hopefully approach, but I think one of them is, when you mentioned that you still feel that. I think that one of the myths, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've picked up on is that this idea that time heals all wounds. And it's really more of a perspective of healing will occur in time if you make a choice to process the loss.
That's an excellent way to say it. They used to call it the grief process, and I had people coming, I just got to get through this, I want to get on to the other side. And we finally start calling it a grief journey. So once you enter into the grief journey, you're on it. This is part of your story. These people in your lives, the things that happen, and how you embrace that. And whether it becomes a positive or negative in your life depends on how you choose to embrace it and process it and work through it. And you can stay in the area of denial, but grief will just sit around and wait, and then something dramatic will happen, and you just can't even understand where it's coming from. So I always like to say, people always ask, well, this child is doing okay, but I'm really concerned about this child. And
Right.
I think it's a misconception because a child appears to be doing fine, doing school, that they're okay.
Mhm.
So I think everybody sent me off to school, back to college, thinking I was okay, and it wasn't. And I
Yeah.
pretended to be okay pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pretended really well.
We definitely take cues from our family members and the people around you. So thinking of that, could you speak a little bit to the idea, like the different pendulum of, hey, over here we're well because we processed, and over here we've done nothing, how that grief kind of impacts all the parts of us, the emotional part, the spiritual part, the relational part. Like, how does that impact us? And you talked about being on a journey, and we're on it forever, right? We don't go back to the way we were. But what have you seen in your own life and in all of the people that you've interacted with? What have been some of the biggest impacts you've seen?
Well, and you mentioned that we're affected in all parts of our lives. So we're
Mhm.
affected we're physically. In fact, I'd like to show a video of how it affects us physically. I think you have the link still.
Yes.
I'll let you get to that. It affects us emotionally, and it affects us in our relationships. It affects every part of our life, and spiritually, because when
Mhm.
somebody dies or leaves, we have all kinds of questions, and we're trying to figure it out. And uh, not that we'll know the answers, but there's those question marks that begin to occur. One of the
Right.
amazing things that's the reason this link is real important. This video, it's 3 minutes, is that some of the things we've been doing at the Lighthouse now for almost 20 years, we're seeing research coming in and showing that us why it works, why our brain works like it does. I actually have a new volunteer who's working on her PhD in neuropsychology, and she's working on trauma in the brain and how that
Mhm.
affects us and how loss affects our brain. And so if we begin to understand that we can't just pick it up this is a traumatic experience. And if we're a
Right.
child, we just don't have the tools in our toolbox. It's hard to
Yeah.
have them as an adult, but much less. And then we don't have the verbal skills. And so that is one of the things that I think if we can grasp that.
Right.
And one of the things I tell people all the time, that what your experience is normal, and they don't feel normal, and then they actually feel like they're going crazy, and they said that's one of the things that helps them the most, knowing they're not going crazy. Can you
Mhm.
pull that video up now? Or
Yes, I can. I think that's something that's so important, is definitely, when we look at that, is I have to do all these permissions. So give me just a second here. But one of the things is this idea of um, kind of um, normal doesn't feel normal. So it's like this, it is a new version of normal that you're going to have all of these things. So let me
When we're
play
grieving a
this.
profound loss, we often say we're heartbroken, but it might be more accurate to say brain broken, given the role the brain plays in grief. As your brain adjusts to the loss of someone you love, you might feel numb, depressed, or foggy. But moving through the stages of grief is natural and healthy. It helps you process your loss and begin to move forward over time. This is Your Brain On, where we explore how the world affects our brains and ourselves. The experience of grief is twofold: the immediate acute pain of the loss, and the months afterward as you mourn. The loss of someone meaningful functions as a stressor, triggering the pituitary gland at the base of the brain to produce adrenocorticotrophin, or ACTH. ACTH sends a signal to the adrenal gland to release cortisone, a stress hormone. Unlike, say, a temporary threat, grief is an intense, persistent stressor, so your body remains flooded with cortisone. That can cause your immune system to falter, making you feel run down. This is likely why some bereaved spouses fall ill soon after their partner dies. Even if the death of your loved one was expected, the actual event can still feel like a shock to the system. In the short term, a traumatized brain is bottom-heavy, meaning primitive areas, including the fear center, are overactive, adding to feelings of stress and despair. Meanwhile, higher cortical areas of the brain are underactive, like the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotion. You may find it difficult to let go of minor annoyances or experience symptoms like increased heart rate for several minutes after you're startled. However, over time, the initial shock of the loss typically gives way to a deep sadness or depression as you continue to mourn. Depression can cause widespread changes across several parts of the brain, including the amygdala, which regulates sleep behavior and mood, and the hippocampus, which processes memory and regulates stress hormones. These changes disrupt core functions of our bodies and minds. As you grieve, you may find yourself sleeping too little or too much, forgetting things, or trapped in a brain fog. These feelings are difficult, but the acute pain doesn't last forever. Eventually, the sadness begins to lift at least a little bit, and then you may move on to feelings of anger or guilt before slowly moving toward acceptance of the loss. Experts agree the bereaved follow their own individual timelines, but in general, this 3-stage process usually takes about a year. There are steps you can take to feel better as you go through the grieving process. Talk therapy can be a major help. This might be group bereavement meetings or cognitive behavioral therapy, which can redirect negative thoughts. Aerobic exercise can improve mood, memory, and thought processing. Talking with friends about the person you lost can be a great comfort too. Studies show long-term grief actually activates neurons in the reward centers of the brain. And recalling the time spent with those who have died reminds us that the memories still live on.
That is such a great video. I love all that it's described.
The one thing that I think that they're probably missing is that it's usually 2 to 3 years before those stressors, the stress hormone cortisol, they're actually have been doing some studies where they test people that are grieving, that are going through a support group as opposed to not, and that after a support group of 9 or 10 weeks, the cortisol levels are way down in people that are going to support groups. So
wow.
It's I always say it's healthy to
Yeah.
to take care of yourself.
And yes. Yeah. So thinking about that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just say, I just wanted to add to, these are statistics before we knew this kind of information. And I just wanted to say this was a study of 1 million children, and they had single parent. They were raised by single parents, and they were tracked for 10 years, which is a long study.
Yeah.
And they are twice as likely to develop serious psychiatric illnesses and addictions later in life, experience severe depression or schizophrenia, attempt a suicide or complete a suicide, develop an alcoholic-related disease. Girls are 3 times more likely to become drug addicts if they lived with a sole parent, and boys are 4 times more likely to become drug addicts if they live with a sole parent. And my thinking, of course, I don't know, but I feel they're just in pain. And they're trying any way they can to deal with this pain. And so they self-medicate.
Yeah.
And I also, and I don't know specifically, their brains are developing.
Right.
Small children's brains are developing. And if you're in a home where there's always deep sadness, or always arguing, or always just a cloud in that, I don't think children's brains develop like they should.
Right.
And so in turn, they deal with chronic depression into their adult lives. So it's vitally important to address children's grief, especially children's grief, but your grief too.
Yeah. So thinking on that same line, then, women it talked about connectedness and sharing in the video. And obviously this is a women's group, but women are so interconnected, with parents themselves, spouses, children, coworkers, all that stuff. How have you seen loss affect that connection in the family relationships? Because I know you deal with parents and with children. It's easy to look at kids primarily, but kind of thinking about that connectedness, how have you seen that been impacted?
If family members are willing to reach out of their family unit and
Mhm.
explore how to help each other through grief, you can see some real healing and some very, really, the relationships can grow really tight. But also a time of loss is a time sometimes of where feelings get hurt and anger occurs and people have different ideas of what you're going to do and I'm okay, and people, sometimes there's family divisions and things happen at funerals that shouldn't happen, and you end up with division, or maybe there's money that's involved and there's a disbursement of the assets. This becomes a contentious time for families, and sometimes those relationships are, when you look at what's going on in their brains with all that cortisol, they're sharper tempered with people, and they're very much sharper tempered with their children. And in turn, children are sharper tempered. And so in turn, you can really have a time of just chaos going on in a family if people don't choose to address it, or if they don't say anything. My mother's way of dealing with it was total avoidance, and that didn't seem to help either. So one of the interesting things, we're close here to the Mesquite ISD, and one of the at-risk school counselors had come through our program and was using our, we have what we call a grief and loss inventory. And she started using this with the kids coming in that were causing, that they'd never seen these kids in their program, but they were causing problems at school and having difficulty at school. And once they started doing the grief inventory, they began to realize that the kids are just, we're trying to deal with their behavior. We're not looking at what's happened to them.
Right.
And if they've changed schools 3 or 4 times and they their parents separated, you got a father that's incarcerated, the grandmother's taking care of you, and the granddaddy died. And they were sitting here and having all these things, and they're expected to sit in that classroom and keep it all together. And teachers are trying to deal with kids that are all over the place. So you work in the school district, I know,
Yes.
and they say Monday morning sometimes is one of the more chaotic times for parents, and with teachers and kids. And it's because of what happened at home. So not addressing these issues doesn't help either, ignoring it.
Right. So you mentioned something that I really would like you to maybe comment on. We've kind of approached this from the idea of a death loss, but you mentioned the grief inventory. Can you speak to a little bit of what all areas of life would produce a grief response in us? Because I believe it's not just a death loss. And I'm thinking probably you've encountered some of the same things, but for the women out there that are joining us on the interview that are watching this, they may kind of have that mindset of, oh, I've lost a grandparent, but I wasn't that close to them, or I haven't lost anybody significant. What other things have you found or in your inventory show that trigger that same grief response in us?
Great question. And I happened to think ahead on that question. You didn't know you were going to ask it, but
I didn't.
Here's my list. So that just kind of,
okay.
And I'll just list some of the things. But I mean,
sure.
As you see, it's a long list. Of course, the death of anybody is certainly, but parents divorced. If you are divorced, just a separation, we're seeing more and more families come through our program. The parents never did marry, and they have multiple boyfriends, and they have children with 2 or 3 children with different men. And so they have multiple, and every time there's a loss that's involved with that. If you are adopted, foster care children, orphaned, incarcerated, we certainly understand the loss of a pet. That's usually the first kind of loss that a child has. But when you lose your job, we've had with COVID, millions of people that lost their income on top of everything else. And then you had a death loss, and then, so that is huge. Loss of limb, a loss of sight. I actually had an opportunity to do some grief work with the American Council of the Blind. And I went down to a conference, and one of the things they said when I was finished, people came up, she said, we always talk about our blindness and how to cope, we never talk about the loss of that, the grief of it. So anything like that, fire, if you lose your home by a fire, tornadoes come through, financial insecurity. My mother's 96. She's lost so much. I mean, now she's losing her mental capacity, not being able to drive. So it just goes on and on and on. An abortion, a miscarriage, those things are all things that we grieve. And and children who, I didn't have this problem, but when my children left home to go to college, I mean, some people grieve that hugely.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just some of the things. And so I would imagine that every person that you encounter on a daily basis has had a significant loss of some sort that they grieved.
Yeah. I think that we don't give enough, I'm usually good with words, but the word's leaving me right now. Just enough respect and recognition, I guess, to the idea that we have encountered so many losses and we don't spend time adequately processing through that, taking time to mourn the losses that, we've occurred and incurred in our lives. And like you said, it's not just you process and you're done. It's a journey. So then we keep adding these suitcases to our journey along the way. It's, that they talk about people having a lot of baggage, but you can see sometimes it's, necessary for us to really unpack what's all contained in those. One of the things that Women Unstoppable is really, I guess, advocating for are simple strategies that women can specifically use in a whole variety of life. So if you, obviously, I hear you saying that attending a grief support program is really key. But if a woman wasn't at that stage yet where she was either ready to participate or wanted to acknowledge that she needs to participate, is there anything simple that you would say outside of a grief support group that would be helpful for women in relation to their grieving?
Everybody's individual. And I always say I'm a constant learner of people that are grieving. So I don't have the answer for every person of what will be the magic bullet that brings you to the place. I do think that what happens in grief support groups of any kind, even a support group at your church, even within, family members that want to talk, is that you can be real and express your feelings. Find somebody you can trust to do that with.
Yeah.
Find somebody to share your memories with. A person lives on through their memories of them. And I don't know, my grandmother died before I was born, and I carry her name. And I know a whole lot about my grandmother because of the stories. Once my mom started talking about it, I began to learn a lot about my grandmother. So finding somebody that you can be with, and that word is be, that doesn't sit there and judge you, doesn't. One of the things I hear constantly from people in the group is that I want to just talk to them. I don't want people to fix me. I just need to talk about my feelings. Sometimes I just need to cry. I just, and because I'm crying doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It just, I'm thinking about that loved one or that situation or whatever. So there's so many resources now online. There's so many ways that you can explore. Some people really find benefit in reading about grief. Some people journaling. One of the great things that we do, and people think, oh, how sad that you run a grief center. We have fun here.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of activities for kids to do fun things. The very first night, most everybody doesn't want to be here. The second night, all the kids are saying, can we go back the next night? Because we introduce play. And so putting play in your life when you're grieving, even when you don't feel like it, will produce into your brain. It'll help that cortisol, give you some sort of good feeling that you need. And those kinds of things, some sort of exercise. It doesn't even, you just walk. We've got enough lakes around here. Go by the lake and sit.
Right.
So, men are interesting. They're not going to go to a support group, but they go fishing together,
Okay.
They
Yeah.
really talk, and they go to ball games together, and they're kind of present with each other when they're hunting. They don't have to talk. They can just be with each other.
Yeah.
So they find that, and they're out in nature. And so a lot of times those are the things that kind of can help us get through some of those really dark days.
Those are so helpful. So for the women in your life, make sure you're connecting with people. And I love that. Have fun. I think there's this belief that if we're sad and we're mourning, that it has to be one emotion or the other, that you can't have both. And the truth is that I believe that we see that we have both in the grief journey. We experience all of the emotions, sometimes all in the same, 30 minutes, but
I have a young lady that was in my group Monday night, and of course we've been now 10, 11 weeks into our group.
Mm-hmm.
And it was her birthday last weekend, and she did not want to have a birthday party. She didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But her family decided they had to have one. And she said, I didn't think I wanted it, but it felt so good.
Yeah.
So sometimes we don't want to do something, but if somebody wants to do something, sometimes you just allow them to do it. Sometimes you yourself will have a better feel. And that's all we're trying to do, is just get to each day.
Yeah.
Each day to the next day.
Definitely. So I have loved enjoying you. I'm sure we could talk forever, but in honor of your time and the group's time and kind of getting started a little late, two final questions. One would be, what legacy do you want to leave in relation to all that you've done, and moving forward, what do you hope to leave as your legacy?
That's a really hard question. I know they ask me some movie stars and presidents.
Right.
One of the things I hope that people learn, I do this on a volunteer basis, is that when we serve others, when we volunteer, when we give back, we always get more. And so I hope the legacy is that that you will choose, you'll take my example and choose to find some way to serve our community in big or little ways. And that, I hope, is
I love that.
the legacy that I can leave.
Yes, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, even there from the beach, I see. So for those of you that don't,
if you can't tell.
Yeah.
Teenage room. I thought, well, I'm going to go to the beach tonight.
There you go. I love it. So for our audience members, we do have some local to Texas. We have some not in Texas, but will you please share with them kind of, if they want to find you, where on social media or what website, or how can they locate you specifically if they have more questions or want to follow up or need more support?
Certainly you can contact me at the Lighthouse for New Hope. That number, maybe you can post it.
Sure.
People don't remember those things.
Yeah.
We do have a Facebook page. I'm not real good at social media. That's not my strong point, but our website has a lot of information on grief and loss. If you want to see that video or show that video, we have that link on our website. And so I do want to say that we are offering groups online now. We readapted our curriculum. And so if you're not in the area, you actually can go online. We're finding the groups are fairly effective online. We have groups starting back up in June. And the only thing we do not charge for our services, we're a nonprofit. And so you can go on to our website. Only thing we ask is you enroll. And a first come, first served basis. And generally we're pretty full. So hopefully we can, and it's certainly if find something local, because that human touch is very important too. But don't be afraid to find for support. We all need extra tools in our toolbox when things happen.
Yes, I love that. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. I'm sure we've opened Pandora's box on this. That's the fun of this Friday. We've opened Pandora's box of all the things the women need to do to grieve and move forward in this journey. But I so appreciate all the insight you have.
Right?
So yes, it's been fun. It's so helpful. I think sometimes when we learn to step back and kind of think about, I have all these emotions, where are they coming from? We sometimes forget that all of the things that we go through impact us and what that looks like, and especially seeing, all the myths and stories that we hear about grief and how that impacts us. And oh yes, so much time. We could spend all day talking about this topic, I know. So I appreciate you
I do know
joining us.
probably something has triggered in some of folks.
Mhm.
You know, Jessica is a wonderful resource here, the Women Unstoppable. I'm sure she'd be happy to,
Yes.
you can certainly connect with her. She's probably got some resources too. But
Yes.
don't suffer in silence. Um, Lighthouses are filled with hope, and we
I
just
love
want you
that.
to know that you don't have to stay where you are. You can always um, get unstuck.
Yes, I love that.
Unstoppable.
Well, so for you ladies that are joining us at Women Unstoppable Collective, that is our free group. Please go visit our Facebook business page, Women Unstoppable. And if you have not heard, we still have very few slots left in our membership group. It is called the Women Unstoppable Society, that will be launching, where you get access to our profit coach, Samantha Varner, our finance and relationship coach, Christina Messenger, and your emotion and mindset coach with me, Jessica Hammock. We have weekly Coaches Corner options, where you can bring your questions for your coaches. We also have opportunities to get involved in something called Chick Chat, where we take time to interact with you in a private Zoom link, so that we can navigate through some of the challenges you're experiencing. So there's so many opportunities to learn and grow. So if you have not had a chance to go to our website, womenunstoppable.com, I encourage you to head on over there, because there is continued value in all the access that you have to navigate forward with the challenges. And I hope that today you're able to take away some value from this, recognizing maybe where you're in grief, what that looks like in your life, and some access to resources and things you can try. So thanks again so much for joining us in our Friday interview. Thank you, Nancy and the Lighthouse for New Hope, for being our participant today. And we will see you back here next week for more fun and interaction.